Good afternoon, Zion. I trust that you all are well. I'm going to get started with this conversation and discussion on becoming a multicultural church. My name is Kenneth Lewis Jr., Kenneth I. Lewis Jr. I'm privileged to serve as the pastor of the Green Memorial AME Zion Church in Portland, Maine, as well as the presiding elder of the Nassau District in the Bahamas Conference of our Zion. By now, you probably could tell that that's part of the Northeastern Episcopal District, with Right Reverend Dennis Vernon Proctor is the presiding prelate. First of all, I want to just give props to the entire team, the tech team, and under the guidance and leadership of Reverend Patrick Barrett, General Secretary of Christian Education, who invited me into this space to talk about Green Memorial Church, but also to talk about becoming a multicultural congregation. So I originally told him no. I said, no, I don't want to do that. I'm kind of tired of talking about it. I don't know if there's significant interest in it. I'm not sure that this is a front burner issue in our churches, amongst our pastors and our parishioners. We had a long conversation. I shared some materials and a few books. And one of the challenges, beloved, is most of the research that you'll find in this particular space focuses on the majority. It focuses on the white church, if you will, being intentional in attracting and serving Black and brown constituents in their current spaces. You find very little research studies, books, or successes of a historic Black church in a transition to become multicultural. One of the challenges I find in this particular topic is the word multicultural. I think it's become a buzzword in some context, and it replaced the phrase multiracial. There's a big difference between race and culture, class and ethnicity, and I think we need to tease that out a little bit to understand what is it that we're really thinking about? What is it that we're really looking at? What are we really hoping for? Do we really want to become multi-anything? And I think it's important to have that kind of conversation and dialogue. If you think that kind of conversation and dialogue is important, just say, that's right in the chat. So I know I'm not just talking to this image that I see on the screen, that I'm sharing and talking with some other folks. I think it's important to understand the roots of this particular congregation I've been privileged to serve for the past 19 pastoral appointments. This particular congregation has some really deep roots in anti-slavery, abolitionist movement, self-determination of African Americans. This congregation that I'm privileged to serve is the progeny of the Abyssinian Religious Society, the Abyssinian Meeting House. This church, if you will, that was incorporated in the state of Maine in 1828, the third oldest African meeting house in the United States behind Boston and Nantucket, is down the street and around the corner from the Green Memorial Church. That's a powerful statement of the roots of this particular congregation, because when the Abyssinians ceased to be a church in 1917, when by the legislature's action, the incorporation ceased, those members became members of the then AME Zion Church of Portland Incorporated, which is now called the Green Memorial AME Zion Church. So our roots are deep. And if you don't examine your roots and don't respect your roots and understand your roots, it becomes hard to share your fruit. Can I say that again? If you don't understand your roots, respect your roots, and honor your roots, then it becomes hard to share your fruit. And the thing about sharing fruit is that the fruit is there for the picking. It makes no difference who picks the fruit as long as the fruit is good for one's development and building. And so that's the part I really want to talk about as we dig into this particular topic, a multicultural church. Eberhard Arnold, who wrote a book, Why We Live in Community, offers these particular words. Life in community is no less than a necessity for us. It is an inescapable must that determines everything we do and we think. In other words, it is our community that absolutely drives our culture. Every single church has culture. And in fact, a predominant African American or Black congregation is multicultural already. And I think one of the challenges that we have, again, is we code switch. Multicultural is not multiracial. Multicultural is not necessarily multi-ethnic. Multicultural is not multi-generational. But all of those things are things we talk about and think about and seek to share on. Multicultural congregations could be Black folks from different parts of the country or different parts of the world who have a different cultural context. The thing about a multicultural church, and one of the reasons I'm not a real fan of the phrase, is that when there's multicultural activity going on, it's really a bunch of cliques in the congregation. Birds of a feather still flock together. And so you have these pockets of people who maintain their distinctions and never create a unique cultural context within the congregation. There's a difference between multicultural, multi-ethnic, multiracial, multi-generational than cross-cultural. The difference is this. In a cross-cultural context, there are learnings that take place at the individual level where folks begin to grow based on their experience and their exposure to other people. It's important that we take this seriously. In our current context, in our current places, our churches have people from different places and have different cultures, different norms, different experiences that drive expectations. It's not just about what language someone speaks, whether or not they're Baptist or Pentecostal or Methodist, whether or not they're major holiday celebrators, whether or not they have a different racial identification or a different ethnic identity. The issue is, what is the culture? Culture is that which shapes us. It shapes our identity. It shapes our influences and our behaviors. Culture is our way of being. It refers to shared language, shared beliefs, values, norms, behaviors, material objects. And as I said before, there is a big difference between multicultural, intercultural, and cross-cultural. Where do we want to go? So I talked to you about the roots of the Green Memorial Church, a church that's the progeny of the Abyssinian Meeting House, the Abyssinian Religious Society, formed in 1828. The Green Memorial Church, then called the AME Zion Church of Portland, was founded in 1891. All throughout its formative years, it was the bastion of Blackness in the state of Maine. It was where civil rights was fought. It represented a monumental movement for Black folks, a church built for. This is a FUBU congregation that was built for us, by us, and paid for by us. Early 1900s, 1907, 1909, bought the land. By 1914, built the church. By 1945, paid for the church. By 1973, purchased the parsonage. By 2001, paid for the parsonage. This is the place where the NAACP had its launch in the 60s. This is the place where the entire community comes together on July 4th back in the day to take buses to the beach. This church, steeped in the Black history of Maine. And how can a church so steeped in Blackness become what it is today? And we call ourselves historically African American, but wonderfully diverse. It's important for us to understand Maine. Now, Reverend Coloma Smith will tell you that what happens at university is a unique thing. What happens in Portland is a unique thing because it's based on the context of the place as well as the context of the people. You all know what I mean when I say that? The context of the place and the context of the people. Me personally, I'm from Boston. I'm from the inner city of Boston. I'm from Roxbury. I'm from the hood and the bricks. I have a certain context in which I was raised and grew up. I'm born in the early 60s, grew up in the 60s and 70s, experienced everything in one of the most segregated cities in the country. How can the past 25 years of pastorate, I could be responsible for a multiracial, follow me, multi-ethnic, cross-cultural congregations. Because not only was this in Portland, Maine, from my perspective, but I served in Amherst, Massachusetts, a college town that had a little bit of the same flavor. Important for us to understand that multicultural refers to a community or society that contains several cultures or ethnic groups. We live alongside one another, but each cultural group does not necessarily have to engage with each other. That could be like some of our current churches now, where you got this family and those pews and that pews, but they never engage with one another. I hope someone is here and can follow up with what I'm saying and say, that's right. A multicultural neighborhood may be people who have different backgrounds, but only deal with each other. The Green Memorial Church, from my perspective, is not multicultural. It's a cross-cultural congregation trying to become intercultural. And I hope that's making some sense to you, because a cross-cultural deals with the comparisons of different cultures, cultural communication styles. Differences are understood and acknowledged and can bring about this individual transformation that hopefully develops into a congregational transformation in which cross-culture becomes interculture. I hope that makes some sense to you, that cross-culture becomes interculture. And if you got questions or comments, please put it in the chat. It makes sense for us to stop and engage, because an intercultural congregation is one that is exceedingly biblical. It's exceedingly biblical. in which our roots produce our fruits, and everyone who seeks is found, embraced, encouraged, and loved, regardless of what some sociologists and some misplaced ideologists created something called color or race. We have to begin to transcend that and understand that we're in the people business, the saving business, the securing business, the reclamation business, the regeneration business. And we can still be unapologetically Black as an individual, but my ministry has to embrace everybody. We have to serve this present age, our calling to fulfill. And in the field of which Green Memorial has been planted, with those deep roots, we grow deeper that we might reach higher and wider, is what our theme is. Whoever we reach, we have to bring and accept and love and nurture. And so how do you become this center of intercultural, cross-cultural, some would say multicultural import? We have to learn how to become people that listen. Listening connotes learning, and then learning becomes lasting. We have to become the kind of folks who realize that it's important for us to develop, here's a phrase, multicultural fluency. You're already fluent in other cultures. At work, you have to deal with other cultures. In the world, you have to deal with other cultures. Some may call it code switching. Ain't that right, Dr. Karima? You can operate in various places and spaces because you have a diversity in your approach to engagement. And so we have to become multiculturally fluent in language and experience and background. Get this. Poverty and hunger is poverty and hunger, regardless of the color of skin. Sin is sin, salvation is salvation, and I have committed that whoever walks in the door, I will love on. Whoever walks in the door, I will encourage. And the question is, how do others, unlike the roots, get to walk into the door? There's a story I like to tell about a gentleman by the name of William Gorham, called Will Gorham, city councilor who grew up not far from the Green Memorial Church. He's Catholic. And as a child, he used to go to the cathedral, the Catholic cathedral. He told me a story one time that he asked his mother on his way back up Munjoy Hill to go home, Mama, can we go to that church over there? Talking to the one on the corner of Monument and Sheridan Street, the Green Memorial Church. And his mother said this to him: "No, Willie, that's their church." And he told me how he used to sit outside the church because our services were longer than the Catholic Mass. And as a boy, listened to what was going on inside, but could never walk in. I was the first pastor to ever invite him in the building. When he came into the building, all he did was cry because it was something that he wanted to encounter and experience. And you never know how many people have that same longing. How is multicultural fluency seen in Green Memorial? Is that we learn to speak to one another and speak with one another and listen to one another, because we break things down into its most basic places and points. We don't use a whole lot of old church colloquialisms. And so when we talk about multicultural fluency, I have to understand, and the congregation has to embrace our Latino brothers and sisters and listen to preferences and not try to view them through my African American lens. I have to engage the Polish folks, the Irish folks that we have in our church, the Jewish folks, and listen to their stories to develop an understanding of their background and embrace the differences as not something that separates us, but something that binds us together. It's seen in some ways this way in our music selection. A multicultural fluency. We take Christian contemporary music in the past, put a little gospel flair to it, but it would be the type of song from Hillsong or someone else that someone from a different ethnicity, I'll use the word race because it's easy, race might be familiar with, and they hear it in this place. They hear it in this context. It speaks to them. And so we're embracing the distinctions, understanding that if we want to grow together, we have to learn each other. I don't know if that answered your question, but we had some non-English speaking Latinos attending church. I believe they were Dominican, and we produced 10 in Spanish bulletins so they could read and sing the songs in their own language and not try to force them into an English response. Now, that was a language distinction, but their culture was to go to church. They saw themselves as the darker version of the Latino diaspora. They were more in tune with being black, but they did not have the same language. We were intentional in meeting their needs. One who could speak English, I actually asked them, is your family, are they understanding everything that's going on? And they say, some I try to translate. And I asked, would it be okay if I created a bulletin in Spanish so they could sing all the songs, read all the scripture texts? The only thing I couldn't give them was a translated sermon because I don't always have a manuscript. That's how we explain and deal with this multicultural fluency. Those of you who work in corporate places, you have a different fluency. I just watched a video earlier today about this Black woman who's a news reporter, and she uses all these different voices to find out that she's an Afro-Latino, and when she gets mad, she sounds like Rosie Perez. She's using fluency based on the spaces that she's in to effectively communicate and engage with people that might be different. So when we talk about multicultural fluency, this is what it is. It's a greater awareness of our similarities, a greater awareness of what makes us similar. There are different cultural expressions. There's only one human family. It is necessary for us to be fluent in a diversity of cultural understanding. Get this. Jamaicans, anyone from the Jamaican background calls it rice and peas. If you're from the Bahamas, you call it peas and rice. If you're Puerto Rican, you say it in Spanish with gandules. What's the difference between the three? If I'm talking to the Puerto Rican, I'm going to call it what they call it. If I'm talking to the Jamaican, I'm going to call it what they call it. If I'm talking to the Bahamian, I'm going to call it what they call it, because from my perspective, all three are the same. But I'm not misappropriating their cultural norms. I'm embracing it. I hope that kind of gets at a little bit around that. The other thing is the practice, the discipline of dialogue. James Earl Massey calls this thing the discipline of dialogue. Understanding that dialogue is the way of community. It is the personal dimension of sharing. Dialogue concretizes the will to be in relation with the other person. So at Green Memorial, we have these kinds of conversations. And because our roots are deep, and because we share space and time together, we communicate one with another, there's an authenticity in the dialogue, not just a curiosity in the dialogue. I have a Jewish member who calls me Rebbe, as in rabbi. I don't correct her. To me, it's a term of endearment, and that's how she offers it. I'm her Rebbe. Some people, I'm their pastor. Some people, they call me Reverend, and some people probably call me names that I don't want to know. But we want to embrace that. We celebrate African American History Month, right? Black History Month. But at the close of Black History Month, we have a heritage luncheon in which every ethnicity, every culture, every race has an opportunity to share something from their history and from their background so that we can learn of one another. That includes food. Now, I'll be honest with you, I don't eat everybody's food. That's not going to change. But it includes food, and they have to explain it, express it. I get Irish soda bread from my Irish members all the time. It's dense, it's thick, it's heavy. It was baked that way so that it would sustain you when there was no meat available. I wonder if anyone from any other cultural background or cultural norm have the same experience. And so when we begin to understand that dialogue is a way of explored intention, the way that God is always seeking to share himself with others, it's important for us to dialogue and practice that discipline of dialogue in this diverse world. You've heard, I mean, if we go to the Bible, if you go back to Acts, book of Acts, Acts 2, and the growth of the church, it was multi, it was cross, it was inter. Everyone heard the gospel in their own language and carried it back to their own place. One of the things that's important for us to really understand is that the whole concept of diversity within our church must be based on equity, inclusion, and get this, belonging. Every sinner needs to be included in the gospel. Every saint ought to belong to a church and ought to feel welcome into the place. And so it's not a matter of losing who we are. I would contend, both my daughters went to HBCUs. I would contend if others had that experience, they'd be better. I believe that if others have the experience within our Zion church, our social justice church, our racial justice church, our economic justice church, there are more out there that have a common context than a different one. Because unfortunately, we still focus on color instead of context. And I would argue that as long as color dominates, you will not be able to develop a multicultural congregation, a cross-cultural congregation, and you definitely will never get to an intercultural congregation. Get this. Matthew 28, verses 18 through 20. We know as the Great Commission. I'll recast as the Great Multi-Ethnic Commission, the Great Cross-Ethnic Commission, the Great Inter-Ethnic Commission. Says this: therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, of the Son, of the Holy Ghost, teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded you, and surely I'm with you to the end of the age. We all know that. Excuse me. The phrase make disciples satisfied the question of what Jesus's followers were commissioned to do. We have this commission to make disciples. But the phrase of all nations specified the extensive target that Jesus had in mind. The Greek term here as nation is ethnos, E-T-H-N-O-S. In other words, Jesus was commanding his followers to make disciples of people from all ethnic backgrounds. Someone type in all ethnic backgrounds, all cultures, all people, male, female, everybody. The disciples, to obey this, they had to look past their own biases. And you know, the pews and the pulpit have some biases. We have to confront our own personal biases if, in fact, we want to progress to a multi-cross intercultural congregation. Now, I'm going to say this. It's not for every context. It's not for every church. But if your community reflects that type of composition and your congregation doesn't, the question that I would pose is, why not? What's hindering that movement? Is it old, preconceived notions that that's their church versus our church? I think we have to ask ourselves that question. All ethnic backgrounds, all cultural context. In the Green Memorial Church, we have people from across the diaspora of Blackness, those from the continent, those from the Caribbean, those from the North, those from the South, those from the Midwest, those from the West. Don't you know, with Black skin, those are all different cultures. So I would argue that even in your current church, if you are 100% colored Black, that you have multi-cultures in your congregation today. Amen. Just ask 3 different people how they cook yams or greens or beans or whatever it might be. You get 3 different answers, and all the answers are right, and you don't want to stay there for the argument. Different cultures, different backgrounds. Where do you start? A Cape Verdean community is an African community, right? I see that, and I know that area really well. You start by being different. You got to be different. Now, this is not, I'm not talking about what the white churches would do with this intentional, I'm going to go out, I'm going to target a particular community. How do you make your congregation welcome? How do you make your church welcome? How do you pique interest? I was going to play our welcome video, but for some reason it wasn't working. I asked you to go to our Facebook page on the Green Memorial Church, one of the earlier ones. And I don't know if I'll be able to take the welcome video and kind of post it, but I'll make sure I share it and other people can see it. I'll send it to the tech folks and maybe they can figure out a way to tack it in there. But in the images that we show all people from all places. Let me say this. On the board of trustees of the Green Memorial Church, I have white folks. Actually, one of the longest serving stewards is a white person. We have white folks on trustee board, steward board. The head of the usher board is white. Half the band is white. You talk about integrated and ownership of the work. When all you see is someone who's different, how do you make that person welcome? Because we still look so much at color. So in Portland, Maine is the whitest state in the union. Less than 2% of the 1.3 million people are white in Maine. There's a large immigrant population from across Western Africa who are in the greater Portland area. And guess what? They don't see themselves as African Americans. They're still connected to place. Ira Berlin's book, The Making of African American, will give you great insight into the movements of people of color onto these shores. And so I think it's important to understand my context, the context of this church. We're in Portland, which is in southern Maine. Portland is the most diverse community in the entire state. Greater Portland probably has somewhere between 8% to 12% of its total population that's not white. And it's not all quote unquote black or African American or black as the census would put it, because people self-identify. We've had people come because of the African in our name and then realize we weren't African, but we had African people in the congregation who they could connect with from Ghana and Liberia and the Congo right here every Sunday if we were face to face. Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, Nicaraguans, Guatemalans right here in the congregation. Those from the South and those who are 8 generations in New England right here in the congregation. We have a member who's the niece of the former Archbishop, Catholic Bishop, Diocese Bishop for the state of Maine. And so what I want to just say very quickly, because we don't have much time, I want you to write down 7 key principles. Write down this: perspectives, policies, purposes, perspectives, policies, purposes, programs, personnel, practices, and power. All 7 of those have to be taken in consideration if you want a successful inter, cross, or multicultural congregation. The power dynamics have to be addressed. Our practices, what we do, how we do, have to be addressed. Personnel, people have to take ownership, so you have to put them into places of, and I'm just not talking about the Willing Workers Club. I'm talking about positions of importance in the congregation. Our programs must reflect the depth and breadth of the congregation. Our purposes must remain spiritual and biblical. Our policies must reflect that. And we must come to embrace that everybody has a different perspective, vision, what they see and how they see it. I'm going to stop talking because I want to address some of the questions that are here. Since we only have a few more minutes to engage, I asked Pat Barrett if this could be a panel conversation, because I think it would be richer than me just talking here and not having you being able to see your faces. Although if you want to join in, we only have a small group. If you want to open up your mic and your camera to jump on with me, help yourself. But if there are any questions, you can put them in, or you can offer them yourself by opening up your mic and turning on your camera if you want to. I don't know if I've helped anyone here today. My goal here was to get you to think. Karima Lewis.
Hi, how you doing? So, this is a subject that I'm quite interested in because of this situation with my own church. But it sounds like with Green, you drew the people in to the church. They came searching.
They came searching.
So we have a different situation. Cape Verdeans are mostly Roman Catholic.
So and Pentecostal.
And Pentecostal? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And so let me say this, Dr. Lewis, and we're not related, but we call ourselves cousins. She's the district director for the Boston district. I give her a shout out.
Thank you.
But friends bring friends to places that they're blessed in, whether or not the friends are white, black, blue, or green. That's the difference here, is that you got to remember that if you were black and you were raised here, most of your friends didn't look like you. All the people you grew up with didn't look like you. People that look like you were your family. It's a small community, but you share good things with people you know.
Yeah. And I think the few visitors we've had has been brought by people who were friends.
Right.
But we also have a little political tension in Brockton, between the Haitian community, the Cape Verdean and African-American / Caribbean, when it comes to putting up candidates for office and things. So I think that's underlying some of the not reaching across the aisles. But I'm not going to...
and so notice I said the Great Commission stuff. I ain't said nothing about
I know. I'm just saying what Brockton...
Stuff. Yeah, I know Brockton really well. And
confront Brockton right now, because we are the only majority black city in the state of Massachusetts. But there's a lot of kind of tension. But anyway, I can talk with you at a future date.
Yes, you can.
So thank you for a good presentation.
You got my number, so you know how to reach me.
I know how to reach you. Thank you for a good presentation.
Bless your heart. Okay. Anyone else?
I don't want to get out.
Thank you, Sister Cornelia, is my Facebook friend. Bless you. I'm always happy to share. Yeah, let me say this. I've been at Green Memorial. I'm in my 19th appointment. I can count on one hand how many times someone has called me and asked me about this particular congregation and this particular context, which makes me believe that, what did it say? Segregation today, segregation forever, right? It's difficult in different places. And sometimes you have to experience something different. And every preacher that has been to Portland had a chance to experience something very different that blew their mind. Because what they saw was something called harmony. They saw people worshiping together, serving together, laughing together, loving together. And what did not get in the way? Race. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, oftentimes when we say multicultural, we're talking about multiracial. We're able to address culture and context because for some strange reason, those who attend here are focused on the same things. We found something in common. And I'll just say this because I don't have much time. There's a significant population in Greater Portland of adoptive parents who've adopted by choice Black children. You do know that Black children are very difficult to have adopted. I'm not talking about fostered. I'm talking about adopted. And in the real heat of George Floyd and other killings that took place, I met with a group of 40 adoptive parents who are raising Black children because they needed this Black man's perspective. And so this ability to engage, talking about fluency, respected enough to be asked, willing to go and willing to tell the truth and shame the devil. I've had parents of teenage boys who the boy realized now that they're Black in America. And I've sat with the parents and the child to talk about what it means. And so therefore our credibility about being honest brokers and concern for our community is elevated. So again, it's about souls, Sister Cornelius. You got that right. It's about souls. Sister Weems, thank you for your support and God bless you. You all enjoy the rest of Truthville 2021. It's been awesome so far.
All right.